Well, I remember thinking it was unusual, but looking back after all these years, I can't imagine we would have done something like this. I was in Salem, Oregon, working for Governor McCall.
In 1970, I was in practice of medicine in Oregon City.
Yeah, I was a student at Portland Community College.
I was a volunteer for a lot of things in 40 or 41, something like that.
I worked for a social service agency for kids on the street.
In 1970, I was a young single mother with a job for General Electric Medical Systems. I was struggling along to pay bills.
These people and many, many others participated in a unique event that year. Vortex 1, a biodegradable festival of life.
Now, who came up with the actual name? Who knows?
Tens of thousands converged at McIver State Park. They camped out and danced to live music. They frolicked in the mud and braved the ice-cold river. Traditional law enforcement had been suspended.
Well, it was the only legalized pot festival in the country.
And for several hot summer days, Vortex created a sort of clothing-optional alternate reality, underwritten and promoted by the Republican governor. All this was, in fact, an unabashed ploy to lure young people away from the city.
More and more we believed that there was likely to be violence in downtown Portland.
I now hereby command you all to disperse.
But for those who ventured into McIver Park, Vortex became an experience unto itself.
It just was eye-opening, spiritually opening. Then within a few more days, I might have been a dope-smoking hippie. I don't know.
When I looked at the documents, sometimes I just stopped and caught myself. I can't believe these people pulled this off.
Funding for Oregon Experience is provided by the James F. and Marion L. Miller Foundation, the Ann and Bill Swindell's Charitable Trust, the Oregon Cultural Trust, and from viewers like you. Thank you.
This was our campsite right here.
Popular culture, rock music, the American Legion, Richard Nixon, Tom McCall. It had all these things, plus sex, drugs, and rock and roll, you know, and with a little politics thrown in.
The Vortex 1 festival brought unprecedented attention to a rural area near Estacada, Oregon. But Vortex had been created to prevent a crisis in Portland, 30 miles away. In the summer of 1970, the Vietnam War raged on. 50,000 Americans had been killed. Raucous protests were occurring in cities across the U.S. And with the Kent State shootings, the deadly war seemed to be coming home. Anti-war demonstrators had taken to the streets of Portland as well. And in early May, near Portland State University, police had responded with unexpected force, sending dozens of people to the hospital.
I was on a park bench right there, and I was watching the blood spurting out of people's heads, and I just turned around and ran. It was really gruesome, very awful confrontation.
Or what they did at Portland State. It was well televised and publicized, and so everyone knew that their friends were getting clubbed by the Portland police. And so there was anger.
There were a lot of people that thought that, how dare we demonstrate against our government's wisdom.
As one woman said, then I have her name down, she said, "Governor, stand up and shoot him." I said, "There might be a..."
And I think that that little drama kind of set a lot of tension in the community. I don't think we'd ever seen anything like that in Portland.
But the tension would only get worse. The American Legion, a large and conservative veterans organization, was coming to Portland.
And we have this potential clash between the anti-war movement and the American Legion, and because they were going to have their national convention here, victory in Vietnam, Richard Nixon scheduled to speak.
A coalition of anti-war groups, the People's Army Jamboree, announced plans to stage its own parades and protests during the convention.
Members of the People's Army Jamboree have already been threatened and harassed.
Portland was going to be ground zero for protest, and people were coming from all over the country.
The People's Army Jamboree were committed to nonviolence, but they also had people in their midst that were not.
Newspaper photos showed National Guard troops training for deployment to Portland, while anti-war groups strategized and planned tactics. Lee Meyer remembers one of the meetings.
And it was kind of chaotic, and it seemed like it was infiltrated with people trying to instigate violence. So at that point, we thought that, we got to come up with something else, something that's not anti-war as much as pro-peace.
Meyer and his friends opposed the war, but they also feared a bloody confrontation. That same fear resounded in the state capitol. FBI intelligence predicted as many as 50,000 anti-war protesters would be converging on Portland.
The FBI advised us this was going to be the most volatile confrontation in the country. We took that very serious.
We decided to go down and talk to the governor's office, and we made an appointment with Ed Westerdahl.
We had a total open door policy, and we felt it responsible to listen to every side of an issue.
And we just thought that they would be interested in hearing our idea. We didn't think it would go anywhere. Rather shortly, within a week or two, we got a phone call that they were giving us McIver Park.
From the beginning, the Vortex Festival represented different things to different people.
Have you been to McIver? It's a beautiful place. It's big and got a lot of trees and rolling hills and the Clackamas River. And that in itself made the event a nice happening.
Containment. That's why we picked McIver Park. Our intention was to draw people out of the city, put them in a location where they could be contained, and Vortex was ideal. You have the river down at the bottom. The other side of the river was forest land where you had to go a long ways before you could get anywhere. And there was a steep road down to McIver.
Vortex was scheduled to begin on Friday, August 28th, but people started to gather at McIver a week earlier.
Somebody told me they were with a couple of their buddies. They're driving into Portland. They get pulled over by a Portland police car and basically are given an escort out to McIver Park. It was just go out there, stay as long as you want.
That's true. We wanted them in the park. The state police were instructed to not give tickets, and if they were young people heading for Vortex, to let them know how to get there.
Here in Portland's Delta Park, city officials shut down a People's Pop Festival and directed the people to McIver. Hundreds of others arrived from a failed rock festival in Wilsonville.
An annual Bullfrog Music Festival has been canceled.
What happened when you got to Wilsonville?
They were really nice. We got a complete escort all the way down here.
Law enforcement officers led many stranded festival goers to McIver Park.
Well, it's pretty interesting being ferried by a state highway patrolman to a rock festival.
They had like about 300 or 400 people down there and didn't have no place to go, and they took and escorted them down and blocked off all the side roads so that nobody could, get in the middle of the caravan or anything. It was really far out.
Craig Dixon played in a band called Jacob's Ladder.
When we heard about there was an upcoming festival going to happen, we decided to go ahead and go on down to the park. We actually set up and played on our own behalf. It was a week prior before the festival happened. There wasn't really any electrical outlets except for where the restroom was. And so we plugged into the restroom area, performing every day in front of a restroom.
I remember it not being quite as organized as it might have been.
Organizing it was more of an organic process.
Even though I was very involved in setting up a medical center, I didn't know who was in charge. I didn't know who we could go to complain or ask for stuff.
It just happened. People came together to solve a problem. I mean, they were using lumber from blown down barns from the Columbus Day storm in 1962 to try to build a stage. Suddenly, helicopter lands at McIver Park. A couple of suits get out. They walk over to a bunch of these hippies trying to build a stage, and they say, "What do you need?" Next day, perfect grain Douglas fir beams are showing up with all this heavy equipment to build the stage. Now you tell me how that got out there.
Governor Tom McCall went on Portland television to present the plan.
3 days from now, Portland will be host to two groups, and they couldn't be more dissimilar.
Well, McCall's speech, to my knowledge, it was the first gubernatorial address to the state of Oregon in a state of emergency, and it's announcing a rock festival.
We can say to those young who are truly dedicated to peaceful disagreement, go to McIver Park, now approved for overnight occupancy.
News of the festival saturated the papers and the airwaves.
It was Vortex. It was all roads led to McIver Park. According to the press and the aerial photographs, this is the longest traffic jam in Oregon history. I mean, a couple of the local farmers, their fields were rented by state parks, and they set up a shuttle system to get in and out of the park. People walked in, people rode their bikes in, people rode their motorcycles in.
Well, we were going to listen to music, camp out, and chase women. I mean, that's what I was doing, and there were a lot of them out there, and a lot of them didn't have any clothing on, and it was great. It was sort of like paradise.
I was just a Miss Goody Two-Shoes. My friend said, "We're going for a ride on the motorcycle in the country." And once we got there, there were people laying around sunning with no clothes on in this big, huge field. And I started thinking, oh my.
Well, first of all, we parked 10,000 miles away and walked, and it was dusty. And that guy with the helium balloon, he was stark naked, tall, long, scraggly hair, and he had a helium balloon attached to his privates, holding him up.
There was a woman who was 9 months pregnant. All she had on was blue jeans. We weren't used to nudity. We didn't see nudity anywhere. Naked people was just amazing.
I'm quite certain that nobody officially made a decision whether you're supposed to let somebody take off their clothes or not. But if it isn't hurting anyone, let's not worry about it. We have bigger things to worry about.
It wasn't going to be a place where the cops were going to come in uniform or in mass and enforce the laws.
I can be held responsible for that because I felt it was the lesser of evils.
There was a lot of LSD, marijuana, probably hashish, mescaline. I was given some peyote buttons.
I didn't know anything.
At Vortex, Dr. Cameron Bangs got a crash course on drug use at large gatherings.
Nobody had ever written an article on treating bad LSD trips. When people came into our medical center, the first few having a bad trip from LSD, I had no idea what you do with them. I didn't learn that in medical school. You give them medication. That didn't help at all. And then finally, a hippie from the family commune came up to me and says, Dr. Bangs, I think there's a better way to treat these people. And so 2 minutes later, the next one came in, screaming and yelling and hollering, and this guy just went and did physical contact with him and reassured them that, no, you're not losing your mind, you will be all right. And the person calmed right down. And then they took them off to a quiet tent that had a fire going and people sitting around it, and just left them there and still gave them some reassurance. And it worked fine. And so I became very skilled at calming these people down.
Throughout the festival, several famous rock bands were rumored to be on their way to Vortex.
But no name acts ever played. It was all local musicians, some from California, some from Washington.
I'm there on that little stage. There's a large barrel of wine with a ladle hanging on the side. And there weren't water bottles like there are today. There was just this giant thing of wine. Oh, great. So, ladle down some wine and go play. Well, what I didn't know was about acid. And I had no idea that it even existed, let alone that I had taken it. So I can remember hitting the floor tom, and floor toms wobbled out across the sea and thinking, okay, that's not normal. And Paul had loaned him this little Sears and Roebuck amplifier, and he started to play, and it came out all over the universe. And I can remember him just doing that and then looking around, and I was doing the same thing, going, my goodness, it's everywhere.
I totally do not remember the music. I don't know why, but I don't remember the music. I just remember the people. Oh, and the steam tent. There was this big, huge, giant plastic tent, and they had fires, and they were having steam baths, and people would go in, and I think they also had a mud tent.
And you'd go in there and get all sweaty in that hot mud, and then you'd get out in the sun and let the mud dry on your body, and then you jump into the river. And I think that was about the cleanest I ever felt out there, was right after a mud sauna.
Is this your first time through?
This is like my first rock festival, yeah. But
I meant the first time through the sauna here.
Oh no, this is about my third time.
It's that much fun, huh?
Oh yeah.
The grounds are amazingly clean. A massive kitchen installation has begun. Everyone is fed. There is no charge.
Zidell was a ship dismantling company in Portland at the time, and they had donated some big, huge pots for cooking mass amounts of food in. And they even provided this steam engine that they trucked out there to cook these huge cauldrons of food. I had my camera there, and I remember this one picture I have, this guy with a tin logging hat, and he's got his wife, and he's like, his cut-off pants and everything, and his suspenders, and he's got a quart of Bohemian beer in his back pocket. And I thought, well, this is great, we got all these people coming in, they're having conversations, they're in a hippie zoo, whatever. I mean, at least it was bringing people together.
I remember being down at the river one time, and one of the early crowds came. They were up along the fence line, and they were just watching us naked people down below, and somebody went up and said to them, hey, if you want to look at us, you can just come down here and take off your clothes and get a better look. And like about half of them did.
Oh, I didn't have fun. I was working. I was in and out of there. We kept a helicopter up on the top of the hill because I had to be downtown also.
The command center for the festival was set up in Suite 2020 of the Hilton Hotel in downtown Portland. And I recall being there almost 2 weeks, moving to Portland with some of the governor's staff.
A small group of government officials had sequestered themselves at the Hilton, monitoring every detail of the Legion Convention, the People's Army Jamboree, the various parades and demonstrations, and Vortex. A contingent of National Guardsmen waited in the hotel's underground parking area, armed and ready to take charge of the streets if necessary. Tom McCall would be up for re-election just weeks later in November, facing a strong opponent who openly criticized Vortex.
I think that he made a basic error of judgment. I think that the damage that we're going to have to pay because the governor permitted the laws to be broken freely at McIver Park is a matter of very serious concern.
The Vortex experiment was, at almost every level, a risky venture.
To my knowledge, we didn't put any insurance in place. First of all, we didn't have time. Things were happening very quickly. Secondly, I don't think anybody would have insured it.
McCall, he rolled the dice. When's the last time a candidate did that?
Well, I'm ashamed to say that at the time I was so involved in the music and what we were doing musically that I didn't know that there were all these political ramifications and its purpose. We just thought, a festival, all right.
Vortex, this free-spirited festival of love and life, took place within a shell of government oversight.
We had undercover law enforcement officials in the park, so we would prevent people from being hurt to the degree possible. We had a company of National Guard. They were camped up at the top of the steep road and back out of sight in case we needed more manpower.
A state police SWAT team was stationed in a park maintenance building.
I didn't have any idea. I don't think any of us knew that. It would be counterproductive to bring that to our attention, I think.
Vortex could not be without the support it has and is receiving from government. But that fact can't take anything away from the youngsters inside who are proving that you don't need the yellow pages and high salaries to get things done.
Led by a loose-knit group called The Family, countless numbers of volunteers made Vortex work. But much of the food, the music stage, the sanitation and other amenities came from private businesses.
The Portland business community financially supported Vortex because they knew it was in their interest to not have downtown trashed.
No single person seemed to be running the show. But Ed Westerdahl, executive assistant to Governor Tom McCall, was, in fact, in charge of Vortex.
Tom was the policymaker. He wasn't the day-to-day doer. And basically his statement was, Ed, do whatever you think is right.
Westerdahl oversaw the law enforcement and National Guard units at Vortex and in Portland.
I was the only one who could authorize intervention, but there was very little that went wrong.
Richard Nixon canceled his Portland appearance. The American Legion convention proceeded without incident. And the vast number of war protesters never materialized. Only a few thousand showed up in Portland.
As it turned out, the predictions from the FBI were way off.
But attendance at Vortex far exceeded expectations, attracting somewhere between 30 and 100,000 people, some of whom otherwise may have joined the crowds in Portland.
Was there a statement being made walking around naked and smoking dope at McIver Park when young men and Vietnamese are dying by the thousands, in Southeast Asia? And there are people today that still see Vortex as a sellout because you could have been protesting the war.
Vortex absolutely was an anti-war event, I believe. I didn't feel that my going to Vortex was my being used necessarily. The state might have thought about it, the law enforcement, I'm sure, thought about it that way. But, a lot of us were very angry about the war. And there were factions on both sides, I think, that wanted violence, to happen. They wanted those people to come in. They wanted confrontation.
Who knows what would have happened if you'd put another 10,000 people in downtown next to the Legionnaires?
I think we accomplished our purpose. We were able to channel potential violence. And I think that we succeeded. And, there are critics who say that we sold out, but I don't think we did.
The expected crisis had been averted, and the governor turned his attentions to the upcoming election.
He wins by a higher margin than he did in his first term. He's deemed as heroic, risk-taker, brave, and then in the second term, all those initiatives that define Oregon from that era get passed and signed into law. land use planning, the beach bill, the bottle bill.
Vortex One was, and still is, the only state-sponsored rock festival in U.S. history.
My only bad experience at Vortex was when I went up on the stage to announce that there was teepee down there by the river that would be of help to anybody who was experiencing difficulties on a drug trip. And I made this announcement, and all of a sudden, 20 or 30,000 people booed me for bringing up this negative idea.
The scene that stays in my mind more than any scene was the river, the mass nudity. Because I was always raised, something like that would be really horrible to see. But it was very, very, very spiritual.
My naivety was that I didn't know it wasn't like that before. I thought this is how it is, how it has been. So it was a temporary dream, and apparently it wasn't as real as a lot of us hoped.
So I don't think you could do the same thing now. And I think there was a trust issue involved. And it depends on whether you trust your public officials or not to do the right thing. So it would be very hard to do this now.
When it was over, after most festival goers had gone home, Tom McCall visited the Vortex One site and the few volunteers who remained.
So he takes a helicopter from Salem and lands at McIver Park. And there's like a little fire going. These guys are, whatever they're doing, cleaning up. And McCall gets these people together, these hippies, for lack of a better term, and around the fire, they hold hands. And they begin to chant Om. Now, I talked to two people that were in the circle. It happened.
He did take part in an Om circle. And an Om circle was very important to the young people at that time. And I took part in an Om circle. Actually, I took part in a number of Om circles.
Federal intelligence indicated early this summer that upwards of 50,000 young people would be coming. Vortex was a conscious and direct response to the problem of suddenly trying to absorb those thousands of young people into the city of Portland, young people without a place to stay.
And they'd forged a relationship between the counterculture movement in Portland and the state's highest elected official in a collaborative way to solve the problem.
There has never been a Vortex 2.
You sit, you hold hands, and you go, Om.
There's more about Vortex One on Oregon Experience Online. To learn more or to order a DVD of the show, visit opb.org. Funding for Oregon Experience is provided by the James F. and Marion L. Miller Foundation, the Ann and Bill Swindell's Charitable Trust, the Oregon Cultural Trust, and from viewers like you. Thank you.